Hi students, welcome back. So in this clip I just want to talk a little bit about one concept that students sometimes struggle with a little bit in chapter 6 of your textbook on trade, and it's the concept of surplus in economics. Now surplus in this setting refers to sort of surplus value. It's extra value or extra enjoyment you get from consuming something, value that's above the price that you actually pay for the product. So if you buy something that's worth more to you than the price you actually pay, you have surplus value. You have sort of extra value. So let's say there's a new CD coming out and you're very excited about this band. They've got a new album, and you think to yourself, wow, I really like their music. It's fun to listen to. I always enjoy it. I think I would get $30 worth of enjoyment out of that album. Like, I'd be willing to pay up to $30 for it if I had to. All right? But then you go into the store and see the CD only costs $18. It's assuming you still buy CDs. I guess you haven't heard of computers yet. That's okay. But let's say you buy that CD for $18. You were willing to pay 30, you paid 18, so we would say you have a consumer surplus value of $12. The extra $12 worth of value that CD represents for you above the 18 that you had to pay. Okay? So that's consumer surplus. It's the surplus, the extra value you get from a transaction where you happen to pay less for a product than you feel it's worth to you. Okay? And that surplus value we actually represent graphically here using our old supply and demand setup from chapter 3. So here we've got our traditional supply and demand position here. Supply and demand creating a equilibrium price. There we go. Well, the consumer surplus, okay, it's the amount of extra value people get above the price of a product. So what's going to be graphically is the area below our demand curve but above the price. Demand curve just shows you the price quantity relation for how much consumers are willing to spend for these different quantities of product. Okay, so it shows the possible prices. The actual price they pay is this equilibrium price. So the difference between what folks would pay and what they do pay is the area of this triangle. So let's just fill that in here to show you. Okay, that sort of hatched-in triangle there. That's the consumer surplus. It represents the extra value consumers are getting from a transaction above the amount that they paid. All right. And likewise, from consumer surplus, there's also producer surplus. It's the difference between how little a company would sell a product for and what they actually get. So here we'd look at the supply curve, which shows us businesses, right? Producers, the companies. And we could see at these different prices, prices over here, what quantity of output would they be willing to supply. Well, we can see they're willing to supply a fair bit at these different low prices. Okay, but they don't get a low price, they get a equilibrium price here. So likewise, the area below this price and above the supply curve is going to give us the producer surplus. Okay, the extra value that companies get when they sell a product for somewhat more than they were willing to. Here we go. Okay, that would be the producer surplus on the bottom with the vertical lines there. Okay, it's consumer surplus up on the top, producer surplus down here. All right. Now, the interesting thing, the reason why we bring it up in the chapter on trade, is that if we have an open economy, if we open up this market we're representing to foreign trade with exports and imports, we're going to tend to find a world price will manifest that's going to be different from our domestic equilibrium price, or as we call it in the book, the autarky price, derived from equilibrium when our market isn't open to trade. So we'll have this new world price, PW, and that's going to change the economic conditions, and it's going to redistribute the surplus value. That's the big thing. Okay? So we'll just do one of these two examples. The other two are in your book, and they're also represented in your slides. So let's consider the case where there's a price higher than the equilibrium price. So the world price is going to be higher. It's going to be above this equilibrium price here, which is just domestic. And you could also have a price that's lower than the equilibrium price. That's also possible. We could show you the effects of that. But let's start with a elevated price. That's the first one Krugman uses in the textbook. Okay? So all you do is you put on a new higher than equilibrium price, PW. Okay, you can see it's above the equilibrium. And to see what effect that price is going to have, just track it horizontally across the graph. See where it intersects with supply and demand, and that'll give you your quantities. Okay? So if we just track a little horizontal line across from our price level, like that. Okay, see where that curve intersects with supply and with demand. Those will give us our quantities supplied and demanded. We'll drop down to the quantity axis here to show that. All right, so it's a little sloppy, but you can kind of see. So here we've just taken that higher price, and it's PW for the worldwide price for this product. Of course, it could be any tradable product. And you can see, okay, here's where this new price line hits our demand curve. Demand curve there. Okay, so that can be tracked down to give us the quantity demanded, QD. And likewise, where the new price level intersects the supply curve, we're going to get our quantity supplied. Okay? So at this higher world price, we're seeing that consumers, of course, are buying less than the equilibrium amount, which would be right here. And the price is higher, consumers are cutting back. On the other hand, with this higher price, firms are attracted to producing this product, and so we've got an increase in the quantity supplied. Okay? Well, now we have a higher quantity supplied than demanded, and of course what that indicates, if the firms are producing more than our domestic consumers are buying, it must mean that they're selling that extra production to, I bet you said foreign markets. They're exports. Exactly. So let's put that on here. There you go. So we're exporting some extra product because of this higher world price. Okay, well, so what happens to the surplus? Well, the surplus is now redistributed and enlarged. So how does that work? Well, we said the consumer surplus, to start with that, it's the area below the demand curve and above the price. Okay, well, now the price has increased, right? It's gone from PE to PW. So a higher price means consumers have less surplus. We're paying more money for our product. And if it's the area below the demand curve and above the price, it's going to be this small rectangle here. Okay. So much diminished. Let's go ahead and put that on here. Okay, so now this sort of cross-hatched area right up there, that's all that's left of the consumer surplus in this example. Okay. Now this is the case when we've got a higher world price than equilibrium. If it's lower, we'll have a different circumstance. We're doing the higher case on this video. Okay, so consumer surplus has lost this large sort of trapezoidal area here. Okay, so that's lost to consumer surplus. All that's left is this piece. Okay, so what happens to all this consumer surplus? Well, okay, we said that producer surplus was the area below the price and above the supply curve. That now includes all this consumer surplus because the price is up here now. So anything under the price and above the supply curve is producer surplus. So all of this, that large triangle of consumer surplus here, that's now producer surplus. It's been gained by the firms in the form of the higher prices they can charge in this world marketplace that we're looking at. Okay, so the consumer surplus has lost this large trapezoid. It's been gained by the producer surplus. Okay, so far we've just seen consumers lose surplus value to the producers, the businesses. Doesn't sound so good. The reason economists would say that there are gains from trade even in this circumstance is because of this extra component right here, this sort of upside down triangle. Okay, that too is below the new price and above our supply curve here. So that triangle too will be part of the producer surplus. So with our new higher world price, producer surplus is this whole very large triangle with the vertical lines. And you can see it clearly in your textbook as well. Consumer surplus has lost this large trapezoid. This is all that's left of consumer surplus with this new high price regime. But this component here, this sort of inverted triangle, this represents new surplus. It's producer surplus, but it means the producer surplus gain is bigger than the consumer surplus loss, you see. And that's taken to mean that the overall improvement, the overall welfare of the economy is elevated in this way. Consumers are losing ground, but the companies are gaining more than that. So the net surplus is increased, is the concept. Okay? And what that surplus represents, where's it coming from? Well, we saw that at this higher price, we're producing more. Our quantity supplied is bigger than it would have been originally. Originally, it would have been right here, corresponding to equilibrium, or equilibrium quantity. Okay? But now we're producing this extra amount. So this surplus just corresponds to the fact that we're producing more valuable output than before. And there's a corresponding surplus for that extra production. So the loss of consumer surplus, which is this guy, okay, it's less than the gain in producer surplus, which is that plus this other triangle here. And on those grounds, we would say the gains from trade can be illustrated with the change in producer and consumer surplus with a high world price regime in an open economy setting. There you go. So that's just to illustrate for you how surplus, producer and consumer surplus, can change when you have a change in the world price driven by an open economy, one that's open to trade. All right? And we can discuss this further on the boards, and of course you can review it in your book and slides, and let me know if you have questions about it. Hopefully this was helpful.